They thought they could bury me under mountains of legal paperwork, just like they buried the truth about Grandma's death, my parents. Hypocrites in Italian suits bet everything on this $6.8 million gamble. But they forgot one thing: the dead don't speak, but they leave time bombs. When I pressed play in that mediation room, the explosion didn't just destroy their lawsuit, it incinerated their fake, glamorous lives in seconds. My name is Tina Withers. I am 28 years old, and for the last 6 years, I have spent my days breathing life back into the dead hearts of antique timepieces at Ethelgard Horology. I understand gears, escapements, and the precise, rhythmic heartbeat of a machine that has outlived its creator. I understand that if you listen closely enough to the silence between the ticks, you can hear the history of a thing, but standing there in the relentless gray drizzle of a Seattle afternoon, watching the mahogany casket of my grandmother, Eleanor Vance, being lowered into the wet earth, I realized that I knew nothing about the mechanics of my own family. I only knew that it was broken beyond repair. The funeral service had begun precisely at 2 o'clock. My grandmother was a woman of punctuality, a trait she had drilled into me during the 20 years I lived under her roof. Yet, the two people who owed her their very existence were absent when the priest began his opening prayer. I stood alone near the grave. The cemetery was awash of monochromatic grief, the slate-gray sky bleeding into the charcoal of the tombstones. I wore a simple black coat, one that I had bought off the rack 3 years ago. It was functional, much like the life Grandma and I had built together. Around me, a small scattering of her old friends and a few neighbors huddled under umbrellas, their breath forming ghosts in the cold air. They looked at me with pity, but I did not want their pity. I wanted the numbness to fade, or perhaps I wanted it to stay forever. I was not sure which was worse. It was exactly 15 minutes past the hour when the growl of a twin-turbo engine cut through the solemn murmur of the priest. A silver Bentley pulled up to the curb, tires crunching aggressively against the gravel path, disrupting the sanctity of the moment. The doors opened, and out stepped my parents, Robert and Linda Withers. They looked less like mourners and more like investors arriving at a board meeting for a hostile takeover. Robert wore a custom Italian suit that probably cost more than my car. It was impeccable, dry, and sharp enough to cut skin. Linda was draped in layers of black cashmere and silk, clutching a Hermes bag as if it were a shield. Both of them wore oversized, dark sunglasses, shielding eyes that I knew, with absolute certainty, were not red from crying. They walked toward the gravesite with a practiced urgency, their chins held high, projecting an image of stoic suffering for an audience that wasn't there. They did not look at the casket. They did not look at the priest. They looked at their watches. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, a physical manifestation of a wound that had never truly healed. I flashed back to 1998. I was 8 years old, standing in the foyer of Vance Manor with a small suitcase. Robert had crouched down, not to hug me, but to tie his shoelace. He had told me that New York was no place for a child, that the real estate market was a beast that required their full attention. They needed to be hands-free to build their empire. They packed me off to Seattle like an inconvenient piece of furniture that clashed with their new decor. Grandma Eleanor had taken me in, not out of obligation, but out of a fierce, protective love that I was only now beginning to fully comprehend. The priest finished. The ceremony ended. The small crowd began to disperse, murmuring their condolences to me as they passed. I nodded, robotic and hollow. Finally, my parents approached. I braced myself for a hug, a touch, anything human. It was a foolish reflex, a phantom limb syndrome of the heart. "Tina," my mother said. Her voice was crisp, devoid of any tremor. She did not reach out. She stood 2 feet away, respecting the invisible barrier of indifference they had erected years ago. "You look tired." "Hello, Mother, Father," I said, my voice steady. "I'm glad you could make it." Robert adjusted his cuffs, looking over my shoulder at the retreating mourners. Traffic was a nightmare coming from the airport. Seattle infrastructure is still a joke. He paused, then lowered his sunglasses just enough for me to see his dry, calculating eyes. Listen, we have a tight schedule. We need to fly back to Manhattan by tomorrow evening. Did Mother leave the study unlocked? Is the paperwork organized? Or is it a disaster there? The wind off the Puget Sound bit into my cheeks, but his words were colder. They were standing over the fresh grave of the woman who had raised their daughter and saved their reputation countless times. And all they could think about was administrative efficiency. She just died. Robert, I said, dropping the formality of father. Can we at least pretend to care until the dirt settles? Linda sighed, a sound of supreme irritation. Don't be dramatic, Tina. We are grieving in our own way. We handle things. That is what the Withers family does. Now, the reading is at 4 o'clock with that ancient lawyer of hers. We'll meet you there. Don't be late. They turned on their heels, the wet grass squelching under their expensive leather soles, and marched back to the Bentley. They hadn't asked how I was. They hadn't shared a memory of her. They had simply checked a box on their itinerary. 2 hours later, I sat in the waiting room of Harrison Thorne, attorney at law. The office was located in a historic building in downtown Seattle, a place that smelled of old money, lemon polish, and dust. The air was thick with the scent of oak and the oppressive weight of impending judgment. Mr. Thorne was a man of the old world. He had been Grandma's lawyer for 40 years. He was in his late 70s, with skin like parchment and eyes that had seen every variation of human greed imaginable. He ushered us into his private office, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound books that looked like they hadn't been opened since the Reagan administration. Robert and Linda took the 2 wingback chairs directly in front of the massive mahogany desk. They sat with the confidence of predators who had already cornered their prey. I took a smaller, stiffer chair to the side, feeling like an observer in my own life. My condolences to you all. Mr. Thorne said. His voice was gravelly and slow. He adjusted his spectacles and opened a thick file on his desk. Thank you, Harrison, Robert said, leaning forward. It has been a difficult week. Mother's decline was rapid. We just want to get this settled so we can honor her wishes and manage the estate properly. Properly, Linda echoed, nodding. We are very concerned about the upkeep of Vance Manor. It needs significant renovation to be market-ready. I gripped the armrests of my chair. Market-ready. They were already selling the house in their heads. Mr. Thorne looked up at his spectacles. He held their gaze for a long, uncomfortable moment before looking down at the document. Eleanor was a woman of great detail. This represents her last will and testament, drafted and notarized 6 months ago, replacing all previous versions. Robert frowned slightly. 6 months ago, I wasn't aware she had made changes. She was a private woman, Thorne said simply. He cleared his throat. Let us proceed to the distribution of assets. The room went silent. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. I found myself syncing my breathing to it. Tick, tock, tick, tock. To the estate, Thorne read, which includes the primary residence known as Vance Manor, located on the waterfront, appraised at $4.2 million. Robert and Linda exchanged a glance. A smirk played on Robert's lips. I could see him doing the math. And the liquid assets, Thorne continued, held in the Vance Family Trust, comprising stocks, bonds, and cash equivalents, totaling $2.6 million. Total estate value, Thorne summarized, approximately $6.8 million. Linda reached out and squeezed Robert's hand. It wasn't a gesture of comfort. It was a high five disguised as intimacy. They were practically vibrating with greed. This was it. This was the infusion of cash they needed to cover whatever holes they had dug for themselves in New York. I sat still, expecting nothing. Grandma had paid for my education, and she had given me a home. That was enough. I expected the house to go to them. I expected the money to go to them. That was how the world worked. The loud and the ruthless took, and the quiet endured. Regarding the distribution, Thorne said, his voice dropping an octave. Robert straightened his tie, ready to accept his inheritance. I, Eleanor Vance. Thorne read from the document. Being of sound mind and body, hereby leave the entirety of my estate, including Vance Manor, the Vance Family Trust, and all personal effects, contents, and residues. Thorne paused. The silence stretched so thin it felt like it would snap and whip us all in the face. To my granddaughter, Tina Withers. For a second, the words hung in the air, refusing to land. Robert blinked. I'm sorry. Linda let out a short, sharp laugh. Harrison, you must have skipped a line. Read the part about the children, her direct descendants. Mr. Thorne shook his head slowly. There is no mistake. Mrs. Withers, the entire estate goes to Tina. That is impossible, Robert said, his voice rising from a smooth baritone to a jagged tenor. Read the rest. There has to be a bequest for us. We are her son and daughter-in-law. Ah, yes, Thorne said. There is a specific request for Robert and Linda Withers. Robert slumped back, relieved. Okay. Scared me for a second there. Harrison, go on. Thorne picked up a separate sheet of paper. To my son Robert and his wife Linda, I leave my husband's collection of vintage postage stamps, stored in the blue album in the attic. Current appraisal value is roughly $450. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and dangerous. Robert's face turned a violent shade of crimson. He stood up so abruptly that his heavy chair screeched backward and toppled over with a deafening crash. This is a joke, he spat, slamming his palms onto the mahogany desk. This is a sick, twisted joke. $400 for a collection of stamps. Sit down, Mr. Withers, Thorne said, his voice hard as steel. I will not sit down, Robert roared. He turned to me, his eyes bulging with a rage I had never seen directed at me before. Usually, I was invisible. Now, I was the target. You. What did you do? I didn't do anything, I whispered, genuinely in shock. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Liar, Linda screamed. She jumped up, her facade of the grieving socialite shattering completely. Her face twisted into a mask of pure venom. You lived with her. You poisoned her mind against us. You manipulated a senile old woman to steal our birthright. She wasn't senile, I said, my voice gaining a fraction of strength. She was sharp as a tack until the day she died. She was 85 years old, Robert shouted. She had dementia. We all knew it. She didn't know what she was signing. He pointed a trembling finger at Mr. Thorne. And you let this happen. You sat here and let a 28-year-old girl coerce a mentally incompetent woman into rewriting her will. Miss Vance was perfectly lucid, Thorne said calmly, though his hand hovered near the phone on his desk. I have video documentation of the signing. Robert, I suggest you calm down. Don't tell me to calm down when I've just been robbed of $7 million, Robert yelled. He looked at me with such hatred that I physically recoiled. You think you've won. You think you can just take everything that belongs to us. It doesn't belong to you, I said, finally looking him in the eye. It belonged to her, and she made a choice. She was not capable of making a choice, Linda shrieked. She was sick, and you are an opportunistic little leech. You took advantage of her isolation. That is undue influence. That is fraud. Robert took a step toward me, looming over the chair where I sat. Listen to me clearly. Tina, you are going to renounce this will. You are going to sign everything over to us right now, or I swear to God, I will bury you. I won't, I stammered. Then we go to war. Robert hissed. He turned back to Thorne. We are contesting this. On the grounds of mental incapacity and undue influence, we will drag this through every court in the state. We will freeze every dime of those assets. We will make sure that by the time we are done, there isn't enough money left to buy a coffin for you, let alone a house. Get out of my office, Thorne said. Standing up, Robert straightened his jacket, regaining a terrifying semblance of composure. He looked at me one last time. You have no idea what you have started. Tina, You are a clock mechanic. We are people who eat people like you for breakfast. Enjoy the house while you can. We will have you evicted and on the street before the year is out." Linda grabbed her Hermes bag, glaring at me with cold, reptilian eyes. "You are no daughter of mine. You are a thief." They stormed out of the office, leaving the door wide open. The sound of their footsteps retreating down the hallway echoed like gunshots. I sat there, trembling, the silence of the room rushing back in to fill the void they left. "I'm sorry you had to go through that, Tina, mister," Thorne said softly, sitting back down. I looked at him, my hands shaking in my lap. "Is it true? Can they take it all away?" Thorne sighed, taking off his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "They can try, and with the amount of money at stake, they will try very hard. They will claim she had Alzheimer's. They will claim you isolated her. They will drag your name through the mud." I looked at the grandfather clock in the corner. It was still ticking, steady, unwavering. "Let them try," I said. Though I didn't feel brave, I felt terrified. But I also remembered the last thing Grandma had whispered to me in the hospital, her grip surprisingly strong on my hand. She had said, "When the clock strikes the wrong hour, look at the silence between the ticks." I didn't know what it meant then, but as the echo of my father's threats faded, I had a feeling I was about to find out. The war for the $6.8 million had begun. But I suspected the real battle would be about something much darker than money. The silence that followed the funeral lasted exactly 14 days. It was a heavy, pressurized silence, like the air before a thunderstorm breaks. I spent those 2 weeks trying to return to the rhythm of my life, waking up at 6 in the morning, drinking black coffee, and driving to Ethelgard Horology to lose myself in the microscopic world of gears and springs. I thought perhaps my parents had bluffed. I thought perhaps the sheer audacity of challenging a notarized will was too much even for them. I was wrong. On a Tuesday evening, a man in a cheap windbreaker knocked on the door of my apartment. He did not smile. He simply asked for Tina Withers, shoved a thick manila envelope into my hands, and walked away without a backward glance. Inside was a stack of documents so dense they felt like a brick. The letterhead at the top screamed Money and Aggression Vanderbilt, Sterling, and Halloway. They were a Manhattan firm, the kind of legal sharks that did not swim in the polite waters of Seattle unless they smelled a massive kill. I sat on my floor and read the complaint. Every sentence was a meticulously crafted lie designed to dismantle my character. The lawsuit claimed that Eleanor Vance had been suffering from undiagnosed, early-onset Alzheimer's disease for the past 3 years. It stated that she lacked the cognitive capacity to understand the implications of her estate planning, but the cruelty did not stop there. The document painted me, her granddaughter, who had washed her hair and cooked her meals, as a predator. It alleged that I had systematically isolated Eleanor from her loving son and daughter-in-law. It claimed I had intercepted their calls, thrown away their letters, and poisoned a vulnerable woman's mind with falsehoods about their financial intentions. They used the legal term undue influence over and over again until the words started to blur into a headache. I felt a physical blow to my stomach. I remembered the nights Grandma and I spent playing chess, her mind sharp as a razor, predicting my moves 5 steps ahead. I remembered her reading complicated investment journals 2 days before she died. There was no Alzheimer's, there was no dementia, but my parents did not need the truth. They just needed a narrative that a jury might believe. The legal assault was only the first wave. The social assassination began 48 hours later. Robert Withers was a man who understood the currency of reputation better than he understood actual money. He utilized his connections at the country club and his old business networks to seed a story that spread like wildfire through the gossip columns of the local Seattle tabloids. I walked past a newsstand on my way to work and saw it. A small, local paper had run a headline, "The Vance Legacy, a Family Feud, or Elder Abuse." Beneath the headline was a photo of me taken at the funeral. It was the moment I had been standing alone, looking exhausted and hollow. But in the context of the article, I did not look sad. I looked guilty. I looked like a schemer plotting her next move. The article quoted anonymous family friends who expressed deep concern over how Tina Withers had cut off poor Eleanor from the rest of the family in her final months. It painted my parents as heartbroken victims who just wanted to preserve their mother's true legacy. I threw the paper in the trash, my hands shaking. But the ink was already on everyone's fingers. When I arrived at Ethelgard Horology that morning, the atmosphere had shifted. Usually, the workshop was a sanctuary of quiet focus, filled with the soft sounds of ticking and the smell of oil. Today, the silence was different. It was sharp. It was judgmental. My colleagues, people I had shared lunch with for 6 years, avoided making eye contact. When I walked into the break room, conversation stopped abruptly. I poured my coffee, feeling their eyes boring into my back. "Morning," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet room. "Morning," Dave, a senior restorer, muttered without looking up from his phone. An hour later, I was summoned to the director's office. Mr. Henderson was a kind man. Usually, he appreciated my work, but today, he would not look me in the eye. He sat behind his desk, shuffling a stack of papers that looked suspiciously like emails. "Tina," he began, clearing his throat nervously. "This is difficult for me. You are one of our best technicians. Your work on the 18th century escapements is unparalleled." "Thank you, sir," I said, gripping the arms of the chair. I knew what was coming. "However," he continued, "we received a formal complaint this morning. An anonymous tip regarding some financial irregularities involving your previous employment references and current personal conduct. My mother sent that," I said, my voice flat. "Or my father. It is a lie. They are suing me. Mr. Henderson, they are trying to ruin me because my grandmother left me her estate." Mr. Henderson looked pained. "I believe you are a good person, Tina, but the allegations are serious. They suggest fraud. And given the high value of the antiques we handle here, the board is risk-averse. We cannot have a technician under a cloud of suspicion regarding financial integrity." "So, what are you saying?" I asked. "We have to suspend you," he said, finally looking at me. "Pending an internal investigation. It is standard protocol. We have to vet the claims. Until this clears up, you cannot be on the premises." "Is it a paid suspension?" I asked. Knowing the answer, "I am afraid not," he said. I walked out of the building with a cardboard box containing my tools and a few personal items. I had just lost my income. I had just lost my sanctuary. The one place where I was defined by my skill, not my last name, had been taken from me by a single email sent from a penthouse in New York. Linda knew exactly where to strike. She knew I took pride in my work, so she decided to turn my profession into another casualty of their war. The isolation tightened around me like a noose. I tried to call Mrs. Gable that evening. She was Grandma's oldest friend, a woman who had taught me how to bake scones when I was 10. I thought she, of all people, would know the truth. She would know that Grandma was sane. She would know that Robert and Linda were never around. The phone rang 4 times before she picked up. "Hello?" Her voice was tentative. "Mrs. Gable? It's Tina," I said, forcing a cheerfulness I did not feel. "I wanted to check in on you. I know the funeral was hard." There was a long pause on the other end. "Oh, Tina," she said. The warmth that usually filled her voice was gone, replaced by a cold, polite distance. "I am surprised you are calling." "Why?" I asked, confused. "We always talk on Thursdays." "Well," she hesitated. "Robert called me yesterday. He told me everything. Tina, he told me about the medication you withheld from Eleanor. He told me how you changed the locks so they couldn't visit." "That is a lie," I cried out, gripping the phone. "Mrs. Gable, you know that is not true. You came to the house every week. You saw us." "I saw what you wanted me to see," Mrs. Gable said, her voice hardening. "Robert explained how manipulation works. He said you are very clever. I think it is best if you don't call here anymore. Tina, I don't want to be involved in court matters. I am an old woman." The line went dead. I sat in my apartment, the silence now deafening. Robert had got to them. He had used his charm, his status, and his lies to rewrite history. He had turned the people who should have been my witnesses into my accusers. I was completely alone. That night, the phone calls began. It was 2 a.m. when my cell phone buzzed on the nightstand. I picked it up, groggy and disoriented. The number was blocked. "Hello?" I whispered. "You are going to lose," a voice said. It was a male voice, low and distorted, but the cadence was familiar. It sounded like one of the lawyers, or perhaps a private investigator they had hired. "Walk away, Tina. You are young. You have a future. Don't make us burn it down." "Who is this?" I demanded, sitting up. "Just a friend giving you advice," the voice sneered. "The legal fees alone will bankrupt you in 6 months. The settlement offer is still on the table. Take the scraps and leave the city, or stay and lose everything." The call ended. I stared at the dark screen, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. They were watching me. They knew I had been suspended. They were tightening the screws. I felt small. I felt like an insect being examined under a magnifying glass by a cruel child who was waiting for the sun to burn me alive. I curled up on my bed, pulling the duvet over my head, wishing I could disappear. Why had Grandma done this? Why had she left me this fortune if it was only going to destroy my life in the darkness? A memory surfaced. It was from 3 weeks ago, just days before Grandma passed. She had been sitting in her favorite armchair by the window, watching the rain. I was winding the grandfather clock in the hallway, the one that had been in the family for 100 years. "Tina," she had said, her voice weak but clear. "Yes, Grandma." "Do you know why I love that clock?" "Because it's precise," I guessed. "No," she smiled faintly. "Because it is honest. But sometimes, machines lie, just like people. When the clock strikes the wrong hour, look at the silence between the ticks. That is where the truth hides." At the time, I thought it was just the poetic musing of a dying woman. Now, lying in the dark with my life crumbling around me, the words felt like a code I couldn't crack. Look at the silence between the ticks. What did she mean? Was she talking about the clock itself, or something else the next morning? I went to see Harrison Thorne. I needed a reality check. I needed someone to tell me I wasn't crazy. "Mr." Thorne looked older than he had at the funeral. His desk was covered in files, my files. He gestured for me to sit. "I have read the complaint," he said, taking off his glasses. "It is aggressive. They have hired Blackwood and Sterling. These lawyers are scorched earth specialists. They don't just want to win, they want to annihilate the opposition." "Can we win?" I asked, my voice trembling. Thorne looked at me with sad, tired eyes. "Legally, the will is solid. Eleanor was competent, but the law is not always about truth. Tina, it is about endurance. They are going to drag this out. They will file motion after motion. They will demand depositions. They will request independent medical reviews of her records going back 10 years. They will depose your friends, your colleagues, your ex-boyfriends. They will make your life a living hell." He leaned forward. "This case will take at least 2 years to get to trial, maybe 3. The legal fees will be astronomical. They know you don't have the liquidity to fight them for that long. Their strategy is not to prove she was crazy. Their strategy is to bankrupt you until you are forced to settle for pennies." "They cut off my income," I said. "I was suspended from work yesterday." Thorne nodded grimly. "I expected that. It is part of the pressure campaign. They want you desperately. They want you hungry." "So I should give up?" I asked, tears stinging my eyes. "Should I just give them what they want?" Thorne stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. "That is your choice. Tina, if you settle, you walk away with nothing, but you get your life back. If you fight, you risk everything. You risk debt. You risk your reputation, but you honor her wish." He turned back to me. "Eleanor knew this would happen. She told me once that her son was a shark who had forgotten he was born a human. She left this to you because she believed you were the only one strong enough to stop him. The question is, are you? I left his office walking into the drizzling rain. I had no job. I had no family. I had a lawsuit that threatened to swallow me whole. I felt like I was standing at the bottom of a deep well, looking up at a tiny circle of light that was slowly closing. But as I walked, I kept hearing the rhythm of the grandfather clock in my head. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Look at the silence. I got into my car and drove. I didn't drive to my apartment. I drove to Vance Manor. The house was technically mine. Though it felt like a battlefield, I needed to go there. I needed to stand in front of that clock and figure out what the hell Grandma was trying to tell me. Because right now, the silence was the only thing I had left. 3 days after my suspension, I surrendered the keys to my apartment. I had no choice, without a salary, and with the looming threat of a legal battle that could last years. Paying rent in downtown Seattle was a luxury I could no longer afford. I packed my life into the trunk of my sedan, my clothes, my precision tools, and a few books, and drove the winding coastal road to Vance Manor. The house stood on a cliff overlooking the Puget Sound, a sprawling structure of gray stone and slate roof that looked more like a fortress than a home. When I unlocked the heavy oak front door, the air that greeted me was stale and cold. It smelled of lemon polish and the specific, dusty scent of a life that had recently ended. I dragged my suitcases into the foyer, the wheels clacking loudly against the marble floor. The sound echoed up the grand staircase, emphasizing the hollowness of the place. I was technically the owner of this mansion, but I felt like a trespasser. I felt like a ghost haunting a graveyard. I set up a base of operations in the library. It was the warmest room in the house, lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and dominated by a massive mahogany desk where Grandma Eleanor had managed the estate. My mission was clear but daunting. I needed to find proof of her sanity. I needed a journal, a letter, a medical record, anything that could contradict the narrative my parents were spinning. For the first 3 nights, I barely slept. I sat on the floor, surrounded by mountains of paperwork I had pulled from the filing cabinets. I organized them chronologically, hunting for a slip in logic, a sign of dementia. I found nothing of the sort. Grandma's handwriting remained steady and elegant until the very end. Her cross-reference notes on utility bills were precise. However, as I dug deeper into the financial records from the last 5 years, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. I was looking for pharmacy receipts or doctor appointments, but what caught my eye were the bank transfers. Grandma was a wealthy woman, but she was frugal. She bought quality, not quantity, yet, starting 5 years ago, there were significant withdrawals from her primary checking account that did not fit her spending habits. I pulled out a highlighter and started tracking them. August, 5 years ago, $50,000 wired to Horizon Ventures. December. The same year, $75,000 wired to Apex Consulting Group. March, 4 years ago, $100,000 wired to Blue River Holdings. The names sounded corporate and legitimate, the kind of boring entities you scroll past on a bank statement without a second thought. But I had time, and I had a burning need to understand where the money had gone. I opened my laptop and started searching for these companies. Horizon Ventures had no website, no LinkedIn profile. The address listed on the wire transfer led to a mailbox rental store in a strip mall in New Jersey. Apex Consulting Group was dissolved 2 months after receiving the payment. Blue River Holdings was registered in Delaware to an anonymous agent. These were shell companies, ghosts. I sat back, rubbing my tired eyes. My parents' lawsuit claimed that I had isolated Grandma to steal her money. They claimed she was incompetent, but an incompetent woman does not wire hundreds of thousands of dollars to shell companies with such regularity. This wasn't the erratic spending of a dementia patient buying 500 televisions. This was systematic. This was extortion. But who was extorting her? I needed more than bank statements. I needed context. I searched the desk drawers again, checking for false bottoms, tapping on the wood panels. Nothing. The library yielded no secrets. Frustrated, I walked out into the main hall to clear my head. The house was silent, save for the rhythmic, heavy sound that had been the soundtrack of my childhood. Tick, tock, tick, tock. I stopped in front of the grandfather clock. It was a magnificent piece, a 7-foot-tall masterpiece of walnut and brass, built in the late 19th century. It had been the pride of the Vance family for 3 generations. As a horologist, I had always admired it, but Grandma had never let me work on it. She insisted she was the only one who knew how to tend to its temper. I looked up at the face of the clock. It showed 11:56 at night. I checked my wristwatch. It was exactly midnight. The clock was 4 minutes slow. I frowned. Grandma Eleanor was obsessed with punctuality. She would correct a clock if it was 30 seconds off. Why would she allow the centerpiece of her home to run 4 minutes behind? And not just today, I realized, looking back at my memories, that this clock had always been slightly off in the last few years, whenever I pointed it out. She would just smile and say, "It keeps its own time, Tina." My mind flashed back to her dying words. When the clock strikes the wrong hour, look at the silence between the ticks. I stepped closer, the professional in me taking over. I opened the glass case that protected the pendulum. The brass weight swung back and forth with a hypnotic, lazy rhythm. A clock runs slow when the pendulum is too long. To speed it up, you raise the bob. To slow it down, you lower it. But when I looked closely at the regulation nut at the bottom of the pendulum, I saw something odd. It was soldered in place. It wasn't meant to be adjusted. The error was engineered. The wrong hour wasn't a malfunction. It was a setting. Look at the silence between the ticks. In horology, the beat of a clock is the sound of the escapement releasing energy. Tick-tock, the silence is the space where the pendulum swings freely before the next engagement. I knelt down, looking at the base of the clock. The wooden pedestal that supported the heavy mechanism. I ran my fingers along the molding. It felt solid. I stood up and looked at the dial again. 4 minutes slow. If the clock was 4 minutes slow, then midnight for the clock would happen at 12:04 my time. But maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe the key wasn't the time it showed, but the time it should show. I reached up and touched the minute hand. I knew I shouldn't force a vintage movement, but my hands knew the tension limits. I gently pushed the minute hand forward, correcting the 4-minute lag. I moved it to exactly 12 o'clock high. The moment the hand clicked into the vertical position, the internal striking mechanism prepared to chime, but instead of the deep, resonant bong of the bell, there was a sharp metallic clunk from the bottom of the case. I looked down. A section of the wooden base, a decorative panel about 6 inches wide, had popped open. It was a spring-loaded drawer, hidden seamlessly in the carpentry, triggered only when the movement was manually forced to align at precise midnight while the striking train was engaged. It was a mechanism of genius simplicity. My heart hammered against my ribs. I reached into the dark cavity of the drawer. My fingers brushed against cool leather and cold metal. I pulled out a small black notebook bound in worn leather and a heavy, encrypted external hard drive. I sat on the floor of the hallway, the cold marble seeping through my jeans, and opened the notebook. It wasn't a diary in the traditional sense, it was a ledger. But it was written in Grandma's unmistakable, flowing script. The first entry was dated 5 years ago, August 12th. Robert called again. He was crying. He says the investors are asking questions. He says if he doesn't pay back the bridge loan by Friday, they will break his legs. I know he is lying about the legs, but I know he is not lying about the debt. I wired $50,000 to the account he provided. He promised this is the last time. He always promises. I turned the page, my breath catching in my throat. December 4th. Linda came to visit. She didn't ask about my health. She asked about the trust fund. She needs money to cover a credit misunderstanding at Bergdorf's. I know it is not clothes. It is the gambling debts. I saw the markers in her purse when she went to the bathroom. I wired $75,000. I am buying my own peace. But the price keeps rising. I flipped through the pages faster. The entries became more desperate, the amounts larger. March 10th. They are threatening me now. Robert said that if I cut them off, he would tell everyone that Grandpa's business was built on laundered money. It is a lie, a vicious lie. But he knows the scandal would destroy the Vance name. He knows I am too old to fight a public war. He is holding my legacy hostage. I wired $100,000. I feel like I am feeding wolves that will eventually eat me. I stopped reading. A wave of nausea washing over me. This wasn't just about a will. This wasn't just about greed. My parents, the golden couple of New York real estate, were frauds. They were broke. The venture capital firms were likely fronts for loan sharks or frantic attempts to cover up a Ponzi scheme. They had been bleeding Grandma dry for years, using emotional blackmail and threats of slander to keep her compliant. The lawsuit, the accusation of undue influence, it all made terrifying sense now. They weren't suing because they were hurt. They were suing because they were desperate. They needed the $6.8 million not to maintain a lifestyle, but to stay out of prison. If they didn't get this money, their house of cards would collapse. I looked at the hard drive. If the notebook was the narrative, the drive was the evidence. I stood up, clutching the notebook to my chest. The fear I had felt for the last 2 weeks began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard rage. They had tortured her. For 5 years. They had made her final years a living hell of anxiety and extortion, and she had borne it in silence to protect the family name, to protect me from the truth of who they really were. But she hadn't just taken it. She had recorded it. She had prepared. I walked back to the library, the notebook in my hand feeling heavier than a stone. I understood now why she had left me everything. It wasn't just a gift. It was a weapon. She knew that once she was gone, the wolves would come for the rest of the carcass. She had armed me, and she had hidden the ammunition in the one place she knew only I would look inside the heart of the time. I sat down at the desk and plugged in the hard drive. A password prompt appeared on the screen. I didn't even have to think. I typed in the date she took me in. August 12, 1998. The screen flashed green. Access granted. I saw the file list. Hundreds of video files, audio recordings, scanned documents. I wasn't just a defendant in a civil suit anymore. I was the prosecutor in a case my parents didn't even know was being built against them. The grandfather clock chimed the quarter hour behind me, and for the first time since the funeral, the sound didn't feel lonely. It sounded like a gavel coming down. By the 6th month of the legal siege, my life had shrunk to the size of a deposition room. The lawsuit had become a living, breathing entity that ate money and excreted anxiety. My savings were hemorrhaging at a rate of $5,000 a week in legal retainers, and the pile of motions filed by Vanderbilt. Sterling and Holloway was now tall enough to serve as a nightstand. I was living in the echoing silence of Vance Manor, surrounded by dust sheets and the ghosts of better times, waiting for the next blow. It came in the form of a text message from my mother. It was the first direct communication I had received from her since the funeral. It did not scream or threaten. It simply said, "Let us meet, for the sake of the family." The Obsidian Room. Tuesday at 10. The Obsidian Room was exactly the kind of place Linda Withers thrived in. It was a high-end coffee lounge in downtown Seattle where a latte cost $12 and the air smelled of roasted beans and pretension. It was neutral ground, in theory, but in practice, it was a stage where the wealthy performed their public lives. I arrived 10 minutes early. I sat in a corner booth with a clear view of the entrance, my back against the wall. I ordered a black coffee and checked the recording app on my phone. Washington is a two-party consent state, meaning I could not use a secret recording in court without the other person's permission. I knew that. Harrison Thorne, my lawyer, had drilled it into me. But I didn't care about the court right now. I needed to hear them say it. I needed a record of their cruelty to play back to myself on the nights when I started to doubt my own sanity. I slipped the phone into the breast pocket of my blazer, the microphone facing out, and waited. Linda arrived at 10 o'clock sharp. She paused at the entrance, letting the light catch her profile. She looked devastatingly fragile. She was wearing a charcoal gray dress that was modest by her standards. and she had done something to her makeup to make her eyes look sunken, her cheekbones sharper. It was a masterclass in visual storytelling. To the casual observer, she was a grieving mother worn down by the betrayal of an ungrateful daughter. To me, she looked like a viper shedding its skin. She spotted me and walked over, her movements slow and deliberate. She didn't hug me. She slid into the booth opposite me and placed her Hermes bag on the leather seat like a barrier between us. "Tina," she sighed, her voice a breathless whisper. "You look terrible. Have you been eating?" "I am fine, Mother," I said, keeping my hands wrapped around my warm mug. "Let us skip the pleasantries. You wanted to meet." Linda signaled a waiter and ordered a chamomile tea with honey, emphasizing the honey as if she needed sweetness in her bitter life. When the waiter left, she leaned forward, clasping her hands together on the marble table. "We cannot go on like this," she said, her eyes searching mine. "This lawsuit is destroying us, all of us. Your father is a wreck. He barely sleeps. He wanders the apartment in New York calling out for his mother. It breaks my heart." I took a sip of coffee to hide my expression. Robert Withers had never called out for his mother in his life, unless he was asking where she had put his checkbook. "It is a tragedy," I said flatly. "If only there was a way to stop it." "That is why I am here," Linda said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "We want to offer you an olive branch, a way out. We don't want to destroy you, Tina. You are our daughter. We just want what is fair." "Fair," I repeated. "Define fair." Linda took a deep breath, as if pained by what she was about to say. "We are willing to compromise. We know you have an emotional attachment to the house. You grew up there. It means something to you." "It does," I said. "So, here is the proposal," she said, sliding a napkin across the table as if it were a treaty. "You keep Vance Manor, the house, the land, the contents. It is valued at over $4 million. We will drop the claim on the real estate entirely." She paused, waiting for me to look grateful. "And in exchange?" I asked. "In exchange," she said, smoothing the tablecloth, "you sign over the liquid assets in the Vance family trust, the cash, the stocks, the bonds, roughly $2.6 million. We split the estate. You get the home you love. We get the liquidity we need to manage the family business. We walk away. No more lawyers. No more press. We issued a joint statement saying it was all a misunderstanding. You get your reputation back. You can go back to fixing your little clocks." It was a seductive offer. If I were the person I was 6 months ago, scared and desperate for approval, I might have taken it. I would keep the house. I would stop the bleeding. But I wasn't that person anymore. I was the person who had found the ledger in the grandfather clock. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the tightness around her mouth. I saw the slight tremor in her hands that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with withdrawal not from drugs, but from the adrenaline of high-stakes gambling. "You need the cash," I said softly. Linda blinked. "Excuse me. You don't care about the house," I said, my voice gaining strength. "You never did. It is an illiquid asset. It takes months to sell, taxes to pay, upkeep to manage. You need money right now, today, liquid capital." "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her smile faltering. "We are wealthy people. Tina, this is about principle." "Is it?" I asked. "Is it about principle, or is it about the bridge loan from Horizon Ventures that was due last week? Is it about the $75,000 you owe to that private lender in Atlantic City?" The color drained from Linda's face so fast, it was like someone had pulled a plug. The fragile, grieving mother vanished. In her place sat a woman with eyes like flint. "What did you say?" she whispered. "I know, Mother," I said, leaning in. "I know about shell companies. I know about the investments that were just cover-ups for Dad's embezzlement. I know you were bleeding Grandma dry for 5 years, 50,000 here, 100,000 there. You weren't visiting her. You were collecting rent in your silence." Linda stared at me. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The ambient noise of the cafe, the clinking of spoons, the hiss of the espresso machine seemed to fade away, leaving us in a bubble of toxic reality. "You went through her papers," she hissed. "You little sneak." "I went through her life," I corrected. "I know why you are suing. You are not fighting for her legacy. You are fighting to stay out of prison. You are broke. Linda, you are completely, utterly broke." For a second, I thought she was going to slap me. Her hand twitched on the table, but then a shadow fell over the booth. I looked up. Robert Withers was standing there. He hadn't just arrived. He had been sitting at the table directly behind me the entire time. He was wearing a dark suit, his face flushed with a mixture of rage and humiliation. "I told you," Robert said, looking at Linda, ignoring me. "I told you she wouldn't listen to reason. She is just like her grandmother, stubborn, arrogant." He slid into the booth next to Linda, squeezing her against the wall. He looked at me with a sneer that twisted his handsome features into something ugly. "You think you are clever because you found some old bank statements," Robert said, his voice low and menacing. "You think that gives you leverage." "It gives me the truth," I said. "And the truth is a powerful defense," Robert laughed. It was a dry, humorless bark. "The truth. Let me tell you about the truth. Tina, the truth is what you can prove in court. And what do you have? The ramblings of a senile old woman, bank transfers that can be explained away as gifts. We have doctors. We have experts. We have the best legal team on the East Coast." "Grandma wasn't senile," I said, my voice shaking slightly despite my best efforts. "She knew exactly what you were. She was a useless old bat who lost her mind years ago," Robert snapped, his volume rising, causing a few people at nearby tables to glance over. "She didn't know what day it was. No jury is going to believe that she cut her own son out of the will because of some moral high ground. They will believe she was manipulated by the only person who had access to her, you." "We are trying to save you," Linda cut in, her voice icy. "You are a clock mechanic. Tina, you fix gears. You don't understand how the world works. If you persist with this, we will destroy you. We will make sure you never work in this town again. We will drain that estate until there is nothing left but dust, and you will end up on the street." "You are my parents," I said, feeling a cold knot in my chest. "How can you do this?" "We are survivors," Robert said. "And right now, you are the predator. You stole our money. We are just taking it back." "It wasn't your money," I said. "It never was. It is all ours," Linda practically shrieked, losing her composure entirely. "We built the name, we maintained the connections. All she did was sit in that drafty house and rot. We deserve that money." I looked at them, really looked at them, and realized there was no love there. There wasn't even hate, really. There was just a vacuum, a hunger. To them, Grandma was an ATM that had stopped dispensing cash, and I was the technician who had changed the PIN. They didn't see me as a daughter. They saw me as an obstacle to their liquidity. I felt the phone buzzing against my chest. I had enough. I knew the recording was legally useless, but morally, it was the final nail in the coffin of my childhood. "I think we are done here," I said, sliding out of the booth. "Sit down," Robert commanded. "No," I said, standing up. "I am not signing your deal. I am not giving you a dime, and if you continue with this lawsuit, I will make sure every single one of those investments is investigated by the IRS." It was a bluff. I didn't know if I could actually trigger an investigation yet, but it hit the mark. Fear flashed in Robert's eyes. "You wouldn't dare," he whispered. "Try me," I said. "See you in court." I turned to walk away. "You bitch," Linda screamed. I heard the sound of liquid splashing and glass shattering. I instinctively ducked to the left. A heavy water goblet flew past my ear and smashed against the wall next to the entrance, sending shards of glass and ice water raining down onto the floor. The entire cafe went silent. Every eye was on our table. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. I walked out of the obsidian room, my heart pounding in my throat, leaving my parents to explain themselves to the shocked patrons and the manager who was already rushing over. I got into my car, my hands trembling so hard I could barely put the key in the ignition. I locked the doors and sat there for a moment, just breathing. I played back the last 30 seconds of the conversation in my head. It is all ours. We deserve that money. They had admitted it. They had shown their hands. I drove back to Vance Manor with a clarity I had never felt before. The sadness was gone. The hesitation was gone. I was no longer fighting to protect myself. I was fighting to execute a judgment. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked different. It didn't look like a fortress of solitude anymore. It looked like a command center. I walked straight to the library. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked its steady rhythm, welcoming me home. I walked past it and sat down at the heavy mahogany desk. The external hard drive was sitting there, plugged into my laptop where I had left it. I had opened the file list before, but I hadn't dared to dive deep. I had been afraid of what I would see, afraid of seeing Grandma in pain, afraid of the reality of her suffering. But now, I needed to see it. I needed to see everything. I woke up to the computer screen. The password prompt blinked at me. I typed it in again, my fingers hitting the keys with force. August 12, 1998. The folder opened. I clicked on the first video file. I put on my headphones, and I prepared to watch the testimony of the dead. I sat there in the library, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating the dust motes dancing in the stagnant air. The directory was open, revealing a list of hundreds of files, but when I tried to click on the first one, a secondary security prompt flashed across the screen. Accessing the drive was one thing. Decrypting the video streams was another. Grandma Eleanor had not just hidden this data, she had fortified it. She knew that if this fell into the wrong hands, my parents' hands, it would be magnetically wiped before anyone could press play. I needed help. I needed someone who understood the architecture of secrets better than I understood the architecture of clocks. I picked up my phone and dialed Marcus. Marcus was not a lover. He was not an ex-boyfriend. He was the brother I never had. A relationship forged in the fires of shared lunches and technical geekery. We had met 5 years ago when he was contracted to upgrade the cybersecurity protocols at Ethelgard Horology. He was a man who lived in the code, seeing the world as a series of logic gates and vulnerabilities. If anyone could extract the truth from this black box without corrupting the evidence, it was him. Tina. His voice was groggy. It was late. "I need you," I said, my voice tight. "I am at Vance Manor. I found something that changes everything." "Is it digital?" he asked, the sleep vanishing from his tone instantly. "It is a hard drive," I said, "and it is encrypted with something I have never seen." Marcus arrived 40 minutes later. Carrying a battered backpack and a thermos of coffee, he didn't ask about the lawsuit. He didn't offer platitudes about my suspension. He simply sat down at the mahogany desk, cracked his knuckles, and plugged in his own rig, a custom-built laptop that looked like it could launch a satellite. "Okay," Marcus said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Let us see what we are dealing with." He ran a diagnostic. Lines of code cascaded down the screen. "This is impressive," he murmured. 256-bit encryption, custom wrapper. Your grandmother did not buy this off the shelf at a big box store. She hired a pro." "Can you open it?" I asked, standing behind him, watching the progress bar. "I can brute force it, but that might trigger a kill switch," Marcus said. "Or, we can guess the master key. You said the directory password was a date. August 12th, 1998, I said. "The day she took me in." Marcus typed it in. The screen flashed red. "Access denied." "Okay, that was the directory access," Marcus reasoned. "The decryption key for the video files might be different. Think, Tina. What else mattered to her? What was the anchor?" I closed my eyes. I thought about the woman who raised me. She wasn't sentimental about birthdays or holidays. She was sentimental about us, about the pact we made against the world. "Try it again," I said. but write it differently. She was a stickler for grammar. August 12th, comma, 1998. Marcus typed it in. August 12th, 1998. The screen flashed green. A progress bar appeared decrypting archive. "We are in," Marcus whispered. The first video file popped open. The timestamp was from 3 years ago. The image that filled the screen was grainy but high definition. It was a wide-angle shot of the very room we were standing in the library, but the angle was odd. It was taken from slightly above, looking down. "Where is that camera?" Marcus asked, leaning in. I looked at the screen, then at the room. The angle aligned perfectly with the bust of Marcus Aurelius on the top shelf of the biography section. Grandma had always loved that statue. I walked over to it and shined my phone's flashlight into the stone eyes. There, almost invisible to the naked eye, was a pinhole lens. She bugged the house, I realized, a chill running down my spine. She put cameras in the statues, in the frames. She turned Vance Manor into a panopticon. "She knew," Marcus said softly. "She knew they were coming for her." We spent the next 6 hours watching the horror unfold. The first video we watched in full was dated 2 years ago. It showed my father, Robert Withers, pacing back and forth in front of Grandma's desk. The audio was crystal clear. "I need the check. Mother," Robert was saying. His voice wasn't the smooth baritone he used in public. It was jagged, ugly. "I don't have time for your lectures." Grandma was sitting in her chair, her back straight. "I gave you $50,000 last month. Robert, where did it go?" "That is none of your business," Robert shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. The sound made me jump, even though it was a recording. "You are spending my inheritance on what keeping this drafty mausoleum heated. Sign the check." "No," Grandma said calmly. Robert leaned over the desk, his face inches from hers. "Listen to me, you old bat. If you don't sign that check, I will make a call. I know a facility in upstate New York. It is not one of the nice ones. It smells like urine and boiled cabbage. And I will have you declared incompetent and shipped there by Monday morning. You will die alone in a room with no windows. Is that what you want?" On the screen, Grandma's hand trembled. She reached for her pen. She wrote the check. "Good girl." Robert sneered, snatching the paper. "See? Was that so hard?" He walked out. Grandma sat there for a long time, staring at the door. I felt tears streaming down my face. I was at college. I had been working. I had been happy, while she was here, terrorized by her own son. "Next file," Marcus said, his voice grim. He was angry too. The second video was from the master bedroom. The camera was hidden in the frame of the oil painting above the vanity. It showed my mother, Linda. She wasn't visiting. She was raiding. She was opening Grandma's jewelry box, the one made of pearl and ivory. She was tossing pieces aside costume jewelry, sentimental trinkets until she found what she wanted. The emerald brooch, the sapphire earrings. "Cheap junk," Linda muttered to herself, holding up a pearl necklace. "All this money and she buys garbage." She stuffed the jewels into her purse. Then she looked at herself in the mirror. She fixed her hair. "Stingy old hag," Linda said to her reflection. "She won't even miss them. She will probably think the maid stole them. Maybe I should get the maid fired. Kill 2 birds with 1 stone." She laughed. It was a cold, brittle sound. I gripped the edge of the desk so hard my knuckles turned white. Linda had fired our housekeeper, Maria, 2 years ago. She claimed Maria had been stealing. Maria had cried, begging for her job. Grandma had been confused, distressed. Linda had orchestrated it all to cover her own theft. "One more," I whispered. "I need to see one more." Marcus clicked on a file dated just 3 months before she died. It was night. The library was dim. Grandma was sitting in her armchair, holding a photograph of me. She was crying. Not the loud, theatrical sobbing of my mother, but the silent, shaking grief of a woman who has reached her breaking point. She had just had an argument with Robert on the phone. We could hear the dial tone buzzing. She put the phone down. She wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. Then, she did something that broke me completely. She looked up, straight at the bust of Marcus Aurelius, straight into the lens. She knew the camera was there. She was performing for an audience of one. "Tina," she said. Her voice was strong, despite the tears. "I know you will see this. I hope you see this." I leaned closer to the screen, sobbing openly now. "I am sorry I didn't tell you," Grandma said. "I wanted to, but if I told you, you would have fought them, and they would have destroyed you. You were not ready. You did not have the armor yet." She took a deep breath. "I am letting them take the money for now," she continued. "I am letting them think they have won. Because the only way to catch a thief is to let him think the vault is unlocked. I am documenting everything, the threats, the theft, the coercion. I am building your armor for you, my darling." She smiled, a sad, weary smile. "Do not hate them, Tina. Hate is a poison you drink expecting the other person to die. Just stop them. Take back what is ours. And remember, when the time comes, be precise. Be patient, like a clockmaker." The video ended. The room was silent except for the whirring of the laptop fan. I buried my face in my hands and wept. I wept for her loneliness. I wept for her strength. She hadn't been a victim. She had been a general operating behind enemy lines, sacrificing her own peace to secure my future. Marcus put a hand on my shoulder. He didn't say anything. He just let me cry until the storm passed. "We have them," Marcus said finally. "This is it. This is the nuclear option." "We need to show Harrison," I said, wiping my face. "We need to end this tomorrow." We drove to Harrison Thorne's house at 6 a.m. We didn't care about politeness. We banged on his door until he answered in his bathrobe. Looking alarmed, we sat in his kitchen, drinking strong coffee, while he watched the videos on Marcus's laptop. Mr. Thorne watched in silence. His face, usually a mask of professional detachment, crumbled. When he saw the video of Robert threatening the nursing home, he took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes furiously. "I knew Robert was a shark," Thorne muttered. "I didn't know he was a monster." "So this is it, right?" I asked, hope rising in my chest. "We take this to the judge. We got the lawsuit dismissed. We counter-sue for fraud." Thorne didn't answer immediately. He stared at the black screen of the laptop. "It is not that simple. Tina," he said heavily. "What do you mean?" I demanded. "You saw it." He threatened her. She confessed to the camera. "Washington is a two-party consent state," Thorne said, his voice sounding tired. "It is illegal to record a private conversation without the consent of all parties involved. Your grandmother installed these cameras secretly. She recorded Robert and Linda without their knowledge in a private residence." "But it proves they are lying," I argued. "It proves it to me," Thorne said, "and it proves it to you. But in a court of law, these videos are fruit of the poisonous tree. They are inadmissible. If we try to introduce them, their lawyers, Blackwood and Sterling, will file a motion to suppress immediately. They will argue that the evidence was obtained illegally, and the judge will have to agree. Not only will the videos be thrown out, but they could counter-sue the estate for invasion of privacy." I felt the blood drain from my face. So it was all for nothing. She suffered for nothing. "No," Thorne said sharply. "Not for nothing. We know the truth now. We know their strategy. We know their weaknesses, but we cannot use these videos as the primary evidence." The assault did not come with a bang. It came with the squeak of a dry erase marker on a whiteboard in a deposition room, and the calm, measured voice of a man I had known since I was a child. Dr. Aris had been the Vance family physician for 20 years. He had treated my chickenpox. He had prescribed Grandma's blood pressure medication. I remembered him as a gentle man with cold hands and a warm smile, who always gave me a lollipop after a checkup. But as I sat in the conference room of Vanderbilt, Sterling, and Holloway, watching him raise his right hand to swear an oath, I saw a stranger. I saw a man whose eyes were shifting nervously, whose expensive new watch caught the fluorescent light a little too perfectly. He was the silver bullet my parents had promised. "Dr. Aris," the opposing counsel began, his voice dripping with false solemnity. "Can you describe Eleanor Vance's condition in the final year of her life?" Aris cleared his throat. He did not look at me. Mrs. Vance was suffering from advanced cognitive decline, specifically, vascular dementia mixed with early-onset Alzheimer's. She was frequently confused. She did not know the day of the week. She often mistook her son, Robert, for her late husband. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning white. It was a lie. A bold, verifiable lie. Grandma had completed the Sunday crossword puzzle in pen every week until she died. "And did you prescribe medication for this condition?" the lawyer asked. "I did," Aris said, his voice gaining a rehearsed confidence. "I prescribed donepezil and memantine to slow the progression. It was crucial for her stability." "And did she take this medication?" Aris paused. This was the kill shot. I have reason to believe she did not. When I visited the home, I often found full bottles in the trash. When I confronted the patient, she told me that her granddaughter, Tina, had taken them away. She said Tina told her the pills were poison. The room spun. I stood up, my chair screeching against the floor. "That is a lie," I shouted, forgetting all of Harrison Thorne's warnings about decorum. "You are lying. You never prescribed those drugs. Check the pharmacy records." "Sit down, Ms. Withers," the court reporter said sharply. "The pharmacy records," the lawyer said smoothly, sliding a piece of paper across the table, "show that the prescriptions were filled, but they were never refilled. Doctor, Aris implies that you, Miss Withers, as the primary caregiver, were responsible for this negligence. They had forged the records, or Aris had written scripts that he filled himself and threw away. It did not matter how they did it. What mattered was the narrative. By the next morning, the narrative was the only thing that existed. The headline on the Seattle Chronicle was not about a will dispute anymore. It read, "Heir or executioner granddaughter, accused of medical neglect in multi-million-dollar estate battle." The court of public opinion does not require evidence. It only requires a villain. And I was perfect for the role. I was young. I was inheriting a fortune. And I had apparently let a beloved matriarch descend into madness to secure a payday. My isolation turned into a siege when I tried to drive out of the gates of Vance Manor to buy groceries. I was met by a wall of flashbulbs. A news van was permanently parked on the shoulder of the coast road. A group of protesters, strangers who had never met Grandma, stood by the gate holding signs that said, "Justice for Eleanor and elder abuse is a crime." I reversed the car and drove back to the house, shaking, that afternoon. I heard a thud against the front door. Then another. I looked out the peephole. Someone had thrown a carton of eggs at the heavy oak wood. The yellow yolks were running down the varnish like tears. I retreated to the library. Pulling the curtains shut, I felt like a rat in a trap. The walls closing inch by inch. Then came the email. It was from Blackwood and Sterling. It was not a motion. It was an ultimatum. Ms. Withers, in light of Dr. Aris's sworn testimony regarding your interference with Mrs. Vance's medical treatment, our clients are prepared to escalate this matter. The withholding of prescribed medication for a vulnerable adult constitutes a felony under Washington state law. We are willing to offer a final settlement. You will relinquish all claims to the Vance estate. You will vacate Vance Manor within 48 hours. You will issue a public apology admitting to your negligence. If you refuse, we will not only proceed with the civil suit, but we will also file a formal complaint with the district attorney's office recommending charges for negligent homicide and elder abuse. You have 24 hours to respond. I read the email 3 times. Negligent homicide. They were not just trying to take the money anymore. They were trying to put me in prison. They were willing to brand their own daughter a killer to cover their debts. I sat on the floor of the library, the silence of the house pressing against my eardrums. I thought about giving up. It would be so easy. Sign the papers, walk away, disappear to a small town in Oregon where nobody knew my name. I could be a waitress, I could live in a studio apartment. At least I would be free. But then I looked at the bust of Marcus Aurelius. I looked at the hidden camera lens that was no longer recording. Grandma had fought them until her last breath. She had lived in fear so I could have a future. If I gave up now, I wouldn't just lose the money. I was admitting that she had died for nothing. "I am building your armor," she had said. I crawled over to the desk. The external hard drive was still plugged into my laptop. The little blue light was blinking. A steady heartbeat in the dark room. "Think, Tina," I whispered to myself. "Think like a clockmaker. If a gear is broken, you don't smash the clock. You look for the bypass." Harrison Thorne had said the hidden camera videos were inadmissible, fruit of the poisonous tree, but Grandma knew the law. She wasn't just paranoid. She was brilliant. She wouldn't have left me a weapon I couldn't fire. I opened the file directory again. I looked at the hundreds of video files we had decrypted. We had been so obsessed with the footage of my parents' cruelty that we had ignored the file structure itself. At the very bottom of the list, separated from the daily surveillance logs, was a folder I had glossed over in my initial emotional state. It was labeled simply, Plan B, only open if they sue you. My hand trembled as I hovered the cursor over it. I clicked. Inside, there was a single video file. It wasn't labeled with a date. It was labeled the insurance policy. I put on my headphones and pressed play. The video quality was different. It wasn't the grainy, wide-angle shot of a hidden camera. It was crisp, well-lit, shot on a tripod. The audio was professional. The scene was a sterile conference room. I recognized the wallpaper. It was a private medical evaluation center downtown. Seated at the table was Grandma Eleanor. She looked impeccable in her navy blue suit. Beside her sat a woman I recognized, Ms. Jenkins, a notary public with a reputation for absolute rigidity, and sitting across from them, looking younger and less nervous than he had at the deposition, was Dr. William Sobel. The timestamp in the corner of the video read, January 15th, 6 months ago. "This is a formal competency evaluation of Eleanor Vance." "Doctor," Sobel said to the camera, "requested by the patient to certify her capacity for estate planning." My breath hitched in my throat. On the screen, "Doctor." Sobel went through the full mini-mental state examination. He asked her for the date. She answered correctly. He asked her to count backward from 100 by sevens. She did it faster than he could check the math. He asked her to recall 3 objects he had named 5 minutes prior. "Apple, penny, table," Grandma said with a sharp smile. "And you are wearing a blue tie, Doctor, which clashes with your shirt." "Doctor," Sobel chuckled. "Your cognitive faculties are excellent, Eleanor. Better than mine, I dare say." Then came the twist. The moment that made me realize my grandmother was playing a game of 4-dimensional chess while my parents were playing checkers. "Doctor," Grandma said, her voice turning serious, "for the record, and under the penalty of perjury, can you certify that I am free of any undue influence, that I am not suffering from dementia, and that I am fully aware of the changes I am making to my will?" "I certify it completely." "Doctor," Aris said. He looked straight into the camera. "Eleanor Vance is of sound mind. There is no evidence of dementia, Alzheimer's, or cognitive decline. She is fully capable of making her own medical and financial decisions." "And do you swear," Grandma continued, pushing a document toward him, "that you have prescribed no medication for memory loss, as none is needed?" "I swear it, Doctor," Sobel said. He took a pen. He signed the affidavit. Ms. Jenkins, the notary, stamped it with a heavy, satisfying thud. "Thank you, Doctor," Grandma said. She looked at the camera. Her eyes were hard as diamonds. "This video is now sealed. It will only be released in the event that my competency is challenged." The video ended. I sat there, frozen. The silence in the library was broken by a sound that bubbled up from my chest. It was a laugh, a hysterical, sobbing, triumphant laugh. "Doctor, Aris had lied under oath yesterday because he thought the past was buried. He thought Grandma was just a lonely old woman who wrote in a diary. He didn't know she had dragged a real expert into a room, on camera. 6 months ago and made him sign his own death warrant as a credible witness. He had perjured himself. He had committed a felony, and I had the tape. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. I grabbed my phone. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. They were shaking with the adrenaline of the kill. I dialed Harrison Thorne. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Tina, it is 3 in the morning. Has something happened? Are the police there?" "No," I said, my voice steady and cold. "But the police will be involved soon, just not for me." "What are you talking about?" Thorne asked, waking up. "I found it, Harrison," I said. "I found Plan B. Grandma didn't just record them stealing, she recorded Aris." "What?" "I have a notarized high-definition video of Dr. Aris certifying her sanity 6 months ago." I said, "He explicitly states she has no dementia. He swears he never prescribed medication. He signed an affidavit on camera." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, I heard the rustle of bedsheets and the sound of feet hitting the floor. "Tina," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "Do not post that video. Do not send it to the press. Bring it to my office at 8 o'clock sharp." "We have them, don't we?" I asked. "We don't just have them," Thorne said. "We have a nuclear weapon. If Aris lied in a deposition after signing that affidavit, he is going to prison. And your parents just suborned perjury." "I will be there at 8, I said. I hung up the phone. I walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. Outside, the news van was still there, a dark shape in the mist. The protesters had gone home to their warm beds. Let them sleep, I thought. Let my parents sleep in their high-rise, dreaming of the millions they thought they had won. Let Linda think she had crushed me. Let Robert think he was the king of the world. Because tomorrow, the sun will rise. And when it did, I was going to burn their entire world to the ground. The morning of the final mediation arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum. It was raining, a relentless vertical sheet of water that washed the streets of Seattle clean. But I knew it couldn't wash away the rot sitting inside the conference room at the King County District Court. I sat in the passenger seat of Harrison Thorne's vintage sedan, clutching my laptop bag against my chest like a shield. My hands were cold, but my mind was burning with a clarity that felt almost supernatural. For 6 months, I had been the prey. I had been the frightened granddaughter, the suspended employee, the accused felon. I had let them chase me, corner me, and pin me against the wall. But today, the rabbit had a gun. "Remember, Tina," Harrison said as he parked the car, his voice low and steady. "Do not interrupt them. Let them speak. Let them dig their hole as deep as they want. Silence is an amplifier. The quieter you are, the louder they will sound." "I know," I said. "I am ready." We walked into the courthouse, the heels of my boots clicking rhythmically on the marble floors. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It was the sound of the grandfather clock, beating in my chest. The mediation was scheduled in Conference Room B, a windowless box with beige walls and a long, oval table that smelled of stale coffee and lemon polish. The air conditioner hummed with an aggressive, rattling noise, trying to scrub the tension from the air and failing miserably. We were 5 minutes early. I took the seat facing the door. I opened my laptop, but I did not turn it on. I just left it there, a black monolith on the wood grain. At exactly 10 o'clock, the door swung open. Robert and Linda Withers entered the room as if they were walking onto a yacht. My father wore a navy pinstripe suit that screamed power, his silver hair coiffed to perfection. My mother was in white, a bold, innocent color that clashed violently with the malice in her eyes. They were flanked by their lawyer, Marcus Sterling, a man with a reputation for destroying lives before lunch. They didn't look at me. They looked through me. To them, I was already a ghost. They sat down opposite us. Sterling opened his briefcase with a sharp snap. "Mr. Thorne," Sterling began, his voice smooth and oily, I trust you have explained the gravity of the situation to your client. The district attorney is very interested in Dr. Aris's testimony regarding the medical neglect. We are doing you a courtesy by being here at all. Harrison leaned back in his chair, tenting his fingers. We appreciate the courtesy. Mr. Sterling, we are here to listen. Sterling slid a document across the table. It was thick, bound in a blue folder. This is our final offer, Sterling said. It is non-negotiable. If you do not sign this by noon, we walk out, and we file the criminal complaint. I looked at the document. The title read, Total Settlement and Release of Claims. Read it, Linda said, her voice dripping with faux concern. We are trying to help you. Tina. I opened the folder. The terms were breathtaking in their cruelty. Clause 1 Tina Withers agrees to relinquish all claims to the estate of Eleanor Vance. Clause 2. Tina Withers agrees to vacate Vance Manor immediately, leaving all contents, personal and otherwise. Clause 3 Tina Withers agrees to issue a public statement apologizing for her mismanagement of Eleanor Vance's care. Clause 4. Tina Withers agrees to pay the legal fees of Robert and Linda Withers, totaling $150,000. I looked up. I didn't blink. You want me to pay you? I asked, my voice flat. After you take the house and the money. Robert chuckled. It was a dry, scratching sound. We have incurred significant costs fixing your mess. Tina, it is only fair. Consider it a tuition fee. You are learning a valuable lesson about the real world. And if I sign this, I asked, will the criminal charges go away? We will speak to the district attorney, Sterling said, checking his watch. We have significant influence. We can frame it as a family misunderstanding, but only if you sign, now. Linda leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. She looked at me with pity that made my skin crawl. Sign it, sweetheart. I am saving you from prison. Do you know what happens to girls like you in prison? You are not built for that. You are soft. You are just a little clockmaker. Don't be stupid like your grandmother was. Stupid, I repeated softly. She died confused and alone because she pushed away the people who could have protected her, Linda said. Don't make the same mistake. The room went silent. The air conditioner rattled. Sterling tapped his pen on the table, a rhythmic tap-tap-tap of impatience. Well, Robert barked, we don't have all day. I have a flight to catch. I looked at Harrison. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. I didn't reach for the pen. I didn't reach for the document. I reached for my laptop. I opened the lid. The screen came to life, glowing blue in the dim room. I turned the laptop around so the screen faced my parents. Before we discuss the settlement, I said, my voice steady, devoid of any tremor. My attorney and I have something we would like you to see. Robert rolled his eyes. What is this? Some sentimental slideshow pictures of you and Grandma baking cookies. Spare us the emotional blackmail. Tina, we are immune. It is not a slideshow, Harrison Thorne said. His voice was like gravel, rough and heavy. It is a statement from the deceased. A statement, Sterling scoffed. Mrs. Vance was incompetent. Any statement she made is inadmissible hearsay. Just watch, I said. I pressed the spacebar. The video player opened in full screen. The audio was turned up to the maximum. On the screen, the image was crystal clear. It was the library at Vance Manor. The morning sun was streaming through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Sitting at her mahogany desk was Eleanor Vance. She did not look frail. She did not look confused. She sat with the posture of a queen, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun, wearing her favorite navy blazer. But what made the room freeze was who was sitting next to her. On her left was Mrs. Jenkins, the state notary, her stamp ready on the desk. On her right was a man my parents had never met, but I knew well from the Plan B folder. It was Dr. William Sobel, the head of neurology at University Hospital, a man whose reputation was unassailable, a man who was definitely not Dr. Aris. Robert shifted in his seat. "Who are these people?" he muttered. In the video, Grandma Eleanor picked up a newspaper. She held it up to the camera. The headline was visible. "Seattle Port Authority announces new expansion." The date was clearly visible. January 15th, 2026. 6 months before she died. Grandma looked at the camera. Her eyes were sharp, blue, and terrifyingly lucid. She didn't smile. She stared straight through the lens, straight through the screen, and straight into the souls of the people sitting across from me. "Hello, Robert. Hello, Linda," Eleanor said. Her voice filled the conference room. It wasn't the weak, whispered voice of her final days. It was the strong, commanding voice of the woman who had run the Vance empire for 40 years. "If you are watching this video," she continued, "it means I have passed on, and it means you have done exactly what I predicted you would do." Robert's face went pale. He started to stand up. "Turn it off," he said. "This is ridiculous." "Sit down, Mr. Withers," Harrison roared. It was the first time I had ever heard him yell. It was a command, not a request. Robert sank back into his chair. Stunned. On the screen, Grandma Eleanor leaned forward. "You have likely sued my granddaughter, Tina," she said. "You have likely claimed that I am senile, that I have dementia, that I do not know what I'm doing with my money." She gestured to the man beside her. "This is Dr. William Sobel," she said. "He is an independent neurologist. He has just spent 3 hours administering a full battery of cognitive tests. Dr. Sobel, for the record, what is your diagnosis?" Dr. Sobel looked at the camera. "Mrs. Vance scores 30 out of 30 on the mini mental state examination. Her cognitive function is superior for her age group. She exhibits absolutely no signs of dementia, Alzheimer's, or any other neurodegenerative disorder. She is completely competent." "And the medication?" Eleanor asked. "The donepezil, the memantine." "You are not taking them, Doctor," Sobel said, "because you were never prescribed them by any legitimate physician. Your toxicology screen from this morning is clean." Linda let out a small, strangled gasp. Her hand flew to her mouth. She realized, in that second, that her narrative, the narrative she had built with Dr. Aris's lies, had just been obliterated. In the video, Grandma turned back to the camera. "I know about Dr. Aris," she said. The silence in the conference room was absolute. It was a vacuum. "I know you paid him," Grandma said. "I know he has been writing fake prescriptions to build a paper trail for my incompetence. I let him do it, because I needed you to feel safe. I needed you to think you had won, so you would show your true faces." Robert was sweating now. Beads of perspiration were forming on his forehead, glistening under the fluorescent lights. He looked at Sterling, but the lawyer was staring at the screen, his mouth slightly open. "I am not just leaving my money to Tina because I love her," Grandma said. "I am leaving it to her because she is the only one of us who is not a thief." She picked up a thick manila envelope from the desk. "This envelope," she said, tapping it with a manicured fingernail, "contains the copies of your bank transfers, Robert. The emails where you threatened to put me in a state home, and the recording of Linda stealing my sapphire earrings." Linda flinched, as if she had been slapped. "I have instructed my attorney, Mr. Thorne, to hold this video," Grandma said. "If you accept the will gracefully, this stays buried. But if you sue, if you drag Tina's name through the mud, if you try to hurt her—" She paused. The look on her face was pure, cold steel. "Then this video goes to the district attorney, and the envelope goes to the FBI." The video was cut to black. For 10 seconds, nobody moved. The only sound was the whirring of the laptop fan and the pounding of my own heart. I looked at my parents. Robert looked like he was having a stroke. His face was a mottled mix of red and gray. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The arrogance was gone. The posture of the successful businessman had collapsed, revealing the terrified fraud underneath. Linda was shaking. She was gripping the edge of the table so hard, her fingernails were digging into the wood. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking at the laptop screen. As if waiting for the ghost of Eleanor Vance to jump out and strangle her, Sterling, the shark, was the first to recover. He closed his folder. He didn't look at his clients. He looked at Harrison Thorne. "When was this recorded?" Sterling asked, his voice tight. "January 15th, Thorne said. "Notarized? Witnessed? The chain of custody is unbroken." "And the neurologist?" Sterling asked. "Doctor, Sobel is ready to testify," Thorne said. "He is very eager to explain why his diagnosis contradicts Dr. Aris's testimony from yesterday." Sterling slowly exhaled. He knew. He knew the case was dead. He knew that if this went to court, he wouldn't just lose. He would be sanctioned for bringing a frivolous lawsuit based on perjured testimony. "I see," Sterling said. "No." Robert suddenly shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "It is a deep fake. It is AI. She never did this. She was crazy." "Robert, stop," Sterling said sharply. "I will not stop," Robert yelled. Standing up, he pointed a trembling finger at me. "You faked this. You used your computer tricks. My mother was a vegetable. She couldn't have organized this." I didn't shout back. I didn't stand up. I just looked at him, feeling a strange sense of pity. He was drowning, and he was trying to scream at the ocean. "Sit down, Robert," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through his shouting like a razor. "Don't you tell me what to do," he screamed. "I haven't shown you the rest of the evidence yet," I said. "What rest?" Linda whispered. "The envelope," I said. "The one she held up in the video. I have it, and I have the hard drive from my grandfather's clock." Robert frozen. "I have the emails, Dad," I said. "I have the bank records of the shell companies, Horizon Ventures, Blue River Holdings. I know about bridge loans. I know about the embezzlement." The color drained from Robert's face completely. He sank back into his chair, not because he chose to, but because his legs gave out. "So here's the new deal," I said, reaching across the table and taking the settlement agreement they had brought. I ripped the document in half. The sound of tearing paper was loud and satisfying. "We are not signing this," I said, "and we are not paying your fees." "What do you want?" Sterling asked. His eyes narrowing, I looked at my parents. They were broken. The facade of the powerful Manhattan power couple had dissolved, leaving behind two scared, desperate criminals. "I want the truth," I said, "and I want it on the record." The video continued to play, dominating the room with the ghostly presence of the woman we had buried 2 weeks ago. But the atmosphere had shifted. It was no longer a legal proceeding. It was an autopsy of a family's morality, performed by the deceased herself. On the screen, Grandma Eleanor adjusted her glasses. She looked down at a sheet of paper with the kind of focused intensity she used to reserve for inspecting the escapement of a rare clock. "To dispel any further doubts regarding my mental acuity," Grandma said, her voice crisp, "let me detail the current state of my assets as of this morning. January 15th, the Vance Family Trust currently holds $2,456,321.18 in diversified securities. The deed to Vance Manor is unencumbered. Title number 45990, recorded in King County. My personal checking account at Chase holds $142,000. She looked up, staring directly into the lens. A person with dementia does not know her liquidity down to the cent. Robert, but I do. I know where every penny is, and more importantly, I know where it has been going. In the conference room, Robert Withers was gripping the armrests of his chair so tightly that the leather creaked audibly. He was not looking at the screen anymore. He was looking at the floor, his face glistening with a sheen of cold sweat. "Now," Grandma said, leaning back in her chair on the screen, "let us discuss the reason why I am disinheriting my only son and his wife." She reached down beside her chair and lifted a heavy, black accordion folder onto the desk. The sound of it hitting the mahogany surface was a dull thud that echoed through the speakers. I know, she said simply. Robert's head snapped up. His eyes were wide, filled with a primal panic. I know about the Zenith Fund, Robert, Grandma said. I know that it is not a hedge fund. I know it is a pyramid scheme you built to pay off your bad real estate bets in 2022. Beside me, I heard a sharp intake of breath from Marcus Sterling, my parents' lawyer. He slowly moved his chair a few inches away from Robert. A subtle, instinctual distancing from a radioactive client. I have the internal emails you sent to your partner, Gary, Grandma continued. Pulling a stack of printed emails from the folder, she held one up to the camera. The text was legible. This one is dated August 4th. You wrote, "We need liquidity fast. If my mother doesn't kick the bucket soon, the SEC is going to look at the books, and we are all going to federal prison." That is a lie, Robert screamed. He shot up from his chair, his face a mask of purple rage. That is faked. Turn it off. I demand you turn it off. He lunged toward the laptop sitting in front of me. Sit down, Harrison Thorne barked. But Robert was past listening. He was a desperate animal. He reached for the screen, his hand trembling. Before he could touch my computer, the bailiff, a large man named Officer Miller, who had been standing silently by the door, stepped forward. He moved with surprising speed, catching Robert by the shoulder and forcing him back into his chair with a heavy hand. "Mr. Withers," Officer Miller said, his voice low and dangerous. "If you move again, I will place you in restraints. Do you understand?" Robert slumped back, panting. He looked at Linda, but she was frozen, staring at the screen in horror. "Let the record show," Harrison said calmly, "that the plaintiff attempted to destroy evidence." We turned back to the screen. Grandma Eleanor hadn't flinched. She was still holding the damning email. "And you, Linda," Grandma said, turning her gaze to the imaginary spot where her daughter-in-law would be sitting. "My dear, shopaholic Linda," Linda whimpered. It was a pathetic sound. "I know about the debts in Atlantic City," Grandma said. "I know you owe $75,000 to a man named Vinny. I know because he called my house looking for you 3 months ago. He threatened to burn down my garage if I didn't pay for your marker." Grandma pulled a cassette tape from the folder. "And I know what you really think of me," she said, "because I have the voicemail you left Robert when you thought I couldn't hear. The one where you called me a useless, stubborn corpse that just won't die." Linda buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. She wasn't crying for forgiveness. She was crying because her mask had been ripped off in front of a room full of lawyers and officers. "I have tolerated your abuse for years," Grandma said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a shout. "I paid your debts. I covered your crimes. I did it because you are family, and because I didn't want the name Vance to be associated with a prison cell. But my patience died the day you threatened Tina." Grandma leaned forward, her eyes blazing. "When you threatened to destroy my granddaughter's career," she said, "when you threatened to leave her with nothing, that was the moment you crossed the line from disappointing children to enemies." She placed her hand on the thick file of evidence. "This is not just a video explaining my will," she said. "This is a confession and an indictment." She looked at the notary, then back at the camera. "I have instructed my attorney, Mr. Harrison Thorne, to hold this file in escrow," she said. "Along with this video," Grandma paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. "If Robert and Linda Withers accept my will," she said slowly, enunciating every syllable, "if they allow Tina to inherit Vance Manor and the trust without contest, if they walk away and leave her in peace, then this file will remain sealed. The evidence of the embezzlement, the fraud, and the elder abuse will go into the incinerator." Robert looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. He thought he saw a way out. "But," Grandma said, and the word hung in the air like a guillotine blade, "if they challenge the will, if they file a lawsuit, if they try to smear Tina's reputation in the press, if they cause her 1 minute of grief," she pointed a finger at the lens, "then Mr. Thorne is instructed to deliver this entire file, the bank statements, The emails, the recordings, and the affidavit of Dr. Sobel to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Securities and Exchange Commission immediately. The silence in the conference room was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb that had just detonated, stripping away everything but the crater. Linda's face went from red to the color of ash. Her mouth opened in a silent scream. She realized, in that terrified heartbeat, that they had not just lost a lawsuit, they had walked into a trap. By suing me, by dragging this into the light, they had triggered the very mechanism that would destroy them. Grandma sat back in the video, looking tired but satisfied. "I protected you from the world for 40 years, Robert," she said softly, "but I will not let you consume Tina to save yourself. She is the best of us. She is kind. She is patient. She fixes things that are broken. You only break things." "Tina," she said, her expression softening into a look of pure love. "If you are watching this, it means they didn't listen. It means they chose greed over family. Do not feel guilty, my darling. You did not do this to them. They did it to themselves. Take the house, take the money, build your life, and never let them wind your clock again. Goodbye, Robert. Goodbye, Linda. May God have mercy on your souls, because the federal government certainly will not." The screen went black. For a long minute, nobody moved. The hum of the projector fan seemed deafening. I looked at the black screen, feeling a tear roll down my cheek. She had done it. From beyond the grave. She had checkmated them. I slowly closed the laptop. The click of the lid latching shut was the only sound in the room. I turned to face my parents. Robert was slumped in his chair, staring at the wall with dead eyes. He looked 20 years older than he had when he walked in. He knew what the Zenith Fund records would reveal. He knew he was looking at 10 to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. Linda was sobbing quietly, rocking back and forth, clutching her designer bag as if it could save her. Their lawyer, Marcus Sterling, stood up slowly. He began packing his briefcase. He did not look at his clients. "I am withdrawing from this case," Sterling said, his voice cold and professional. "Effective immediately, I cannot represent clients who have suborned perjury and are the subject of an active criminal referral." "Marcus, wait," Linda gasped, reaching for him. "Do not touch me," Sterling snapped, pulling his arm away. "You lied to me. You told me the medical records were real. You told me the embezzlement allegations were baseless. You made me an accessory to fraud." He looked at Harrison Thorne. "You have my contact information for the Bar Association formalities. Good day." He walked out of the room without looking back. I sat there, watching the wreckage of my parents' lives. I thought I would feel happy. I thought I would feel triumphant. But I just felt a deep, hollow sadness. They had everything. They had privilege, education, and opportunity, and they had thrown it all away for more. "You should have taken the stamps," I said into the silence. Robert looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. "Tina," he croaked. "Please, the file. You can't send it." "I don't have a choice," I said. Grandma's instructions were clear. If they sue, you sued. Dad, you sued me for 6 months. You dragged my name through the mud. You tried to put me in jail for neglect. "We were desperate," Linda wailed. "We were going to lose everything." "You were always going to lose everything," I said, "because you never earned any of it." I stood up. My legs felt steady. The weight that had been crushing me for half a year was gone. "Harrison," I said, turning to my lawyer, "does the instructions say we have to send the file immediately?" "It says immediately upon the contest of the will," Harrison said, his face grim. "They contested it 6 months ago. We are already late." "Please," Robert fell out of his chair, landing on his knees. The man who had terrified me as a child, the titan of industry, was kneeling on the dirty carpet of a district courthouse, begging. "Tina, I am your father. Don't send me to prison. I will die there." I looked down at him. I remembered the way he had ignored me at the funeral. I remembered the way he had threatened to bury me. I remembered the video of him screaming at Grandma. threatening to put her in a home that smelled of urine. You threatened to put her in a home to die alone, I said, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. You were willing to let her rot to save your own skin. You don't get to ask for mercy now. I looked at Harrison. Send it, I said. Tina, Linda screamed, lunging across the table. Officer Miller stepped in between us, his chest acting as a wall. That is enough, he said. Send it all, I repeated, staring into my father's eyes. The FBI, the SEC, the district attorney, send every single page. Understood, Harrison said. He picked up his phone. I will have my paralegal deliver the packages. They were prepared this morning, pending the outcome of this meeting. No, Robert howled, a sound of pure despair. We are done here, I said. I picked up my laptop. Grandma gave you a chance. If you had just grieved her, if you had just been human for one day, you would be free, but you chose greed. You always choose greed. I walked toward the door. Behind me, the sound of my mother's weeping and my father's cursing filled the air. A symphony of self-destruction. I pushed open the heavy door and stepped out into the hallway. The air in the corridor was cool and smelled of rain. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs. Tick, tock. The clock in my head was finally keeping the right time. Are you okay? Harrison asked, stepping out behind me as the officer stayed inside to manage my parents. No, I said honestly, but I will be. What do you want to do now? He asked. I looked at the exit signs. I want to go home, I said. I have a clock to fix. The heavy door of the conference room clicked shut behind Marcus Sterling, sealing the vacuum where his professional reputation used to be. The sound was final, like the closing of a casket, but inside the room, the funeral was just beginning. My parents were alone. There were no more lawyers to hide behind. There were no more legal shields or polished arguments. There was just the hum of the projector fan cooling down, and the terrified breathing of two people who had just realized the floor had vanished beneath their feet. Robert Withers, the man who had terrified me with a single glance for 28 years, looked at the empty chair where his attorney had been sitting. Then he looked at me. His face was a landscape of ruin. The arrogance that had defined his jawline was gone, replaced by the slack, trembling flesh of a man facing oblivion. Tina, he choked out. It wasn't a name. It was a plea. He took a step toward me, his hands reaching out, not to strike, but to beg. You cannot let him do this. You heard him. He is going to the Bar Association. If the files go to the SEC, it is over. Everything. The penthouse. The firm. The legacy. I stood still, clutching my laptop. The legacy was over the moment you stole from Grandma, I said. It was her, Robert screamed, spinning around to point a shaking finger at Linda. The sudden violence of his movement made Officer Miller step forward, his hand hovering over his taser. She made me do it. She is the one with the gambling problem. She owes $75,000 to sharks in Atlantic City. I had to cover for her. I was just trying to keep the family safe. Linda's eyes went wide. The shock on her face morphed instantly into a feral, cornered rage. She didn't look like a socialite anymore. She looked like a wild animal caught in a snare. You liar, Linda shrieked, her voice cracking. She lunged at him, her fingernails aiming for his eyes. You spineless coward. You were the one who set up the Ponzi scheme. You were the one who said Grandma was taking too long to die. You told me to steal the jewelry. You said we needed liquid assets for the margin call. They collided in the middle of the room. It wasn't a fight. It was a collapse. They were clawing at each other, screaming accusations that were really confessions. You spent it all on high rollers, Robert yelled, shoving her back. You embezzled from the pension fund, Linda screamed, slapping him across the face. I have the emails too. Robert, if I go down, I am taking you with me. That is enough, Officer Miller roared. He grabbed Robert by the back of his expensive suit and hauled him away from Linda. He pinned him against the wall, the force knocking the wind out of him. Sit down and shut up, or you are going out in cuffs right now for assault. I watched them. I watched the people who had given me life, the people who were supposed to be my protectors, tearing each other apart like starving dogs over a scrap of meat. There was no dignity left. There was no love. There was only the raw, ugly panic of self-preservation. I turned to Harrison Thorne. He was watching them with a look of profound disgust. "Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice cutting through the sounds of my mother's sobbing. He looked at me. "Yes, Tina." "Send it," I said. "Send everything. The FBI, the SEC, the district attorney. Do not wait for the sun to go down." "It is already done," Harrison said, holding up his phone. "I sent the signal to my paralegal 5 minutes ago. The digital packets are encrypted and en route to the federal intake servers. The physical couriers are walking into the field offices in Seattle and New York as we speak." Robert heard this. He slid down the wall, his legs giving out, until he was sitting on the dirty carpet of the mediation room. He put his head in his hands and let out a sound that I will never forget, a low, animal moan of absolute defeat. "Come on, Tina," Harrison said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "We don't need to see the rest." We walked out of the courthouse and into the rain. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like ozone and justice. The destruction of the Withers Empire happened with a speed that was almost terrifying. In the digital age, ruin does not march, it sprints. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, the first domino fell. I was sitting in the kitchen of Vance Manor, watching the local news on a small television I had brought down from the guest room. The banner at the bottom of the screen turned red. Breaking news. Federal agents are currently executing a search warrant at the Manhattan offices of Withers Capital, the anchor announced. The footage showed men in blue FBI windbreakers carrying boxes out of the sleek glass building where my father had ruled like a king. Sources say the investigation involves a multi-million-dollar securities fraud scheme and allegations of elder abuse involving a prominent Seattle family. My phone began to buzz. It wasn't the threatening calls from private numbers anymore. It was text messages from numbers I hadn't heard from in years. Old friends, distant cousins, people who had read the articles, seen the headlines, and suddenly realized they had been on the wrong side of history. "Tina, I just saw the news. Oh my God. Are you okay?" We always knew something was off about Robert. "Call me if you need anything." I didn't reply to any of them. I just watched the screen. At 3 o'clock, the stock market reacted. Withers Capital was a privately held firm, but their exposure to public markets was significant. The tickers for the banks that had underwritten my father's loans began to dip. The financial blogs were already dissecting the leaked documents that Grandma Eleanor had so carefully curated. The Zenith Fund was being called the Seattle Enron. At 4 o'clock, the second domino fell. A separate news crew was broadcasting live from outside a medical clinic in downtown Seattle. I recognized the sign. It was Dr. Aris's practice. State medical board officials, accompanied by local police, have just entered the premises, the reporter said, struggling to be heard over the wind. "We have received confirmation that Dr. Gregory Aris has had his license summarily suspended pending an investigation into perjury and the falsification of medical records." The camera zoomed in as Dr. Aris was led out in handcuffs. He didn't look like the smug expert witness who had lied about my grandmother's dementia. He looked small and gray. He tried to hide his face with his jacket, but the cameras were merciless. He had sold his integrity for a payout from my parents, and now he was paying the price. The narrative flipped so fast it gave me whiplash. For 6 months, I had been the greedy granddaughter in the tabloids. By dinner time, I was the whistleblower. I was the heroic heir. The same newspapers that had printed Linda's lies about me starving Grandma were now running editorials praising my courage. The secret tapes of Eleanor Vance. How one woman saved her legacy from the grave. They called me a symbol of resistance against elder abuse. They called Grandma a genius. I turned off the TV. I didn't want their praise. I just wanted the silence. The final act played out 3 days later. Harrison Thorne came to the house. He was carrying a bottle of champagne and a thick folder of documents. He looked 10 years younger. "It is over, Tina," he said, setting the papers on the kitchen table. "Truly?" I asked. "Truly," he smiled. "The lawsuit has been formally withdrawn with prejudice. Vanderbilt, Sterling, and Holloway have issued a statement distancing themselves from your parents. But that is the small news." He tapped the folder. "The probate court has expedited the final ruling given the extraordinary circumstances. The judge reviewed Dr. Sobel's video and the evidence of fraud. He declared the will valid immediately." Harrison poured 2 glasses of champagne. "Vance Manor is yours," he said. "The trust fund is yours. The investments are yours. $6.8 million. Free and clear, no contests, no appeals. It is done." I took the glass, but I didn't drink. "And them?" I asked. Harrison's expression hardened. "Turn on the national news." I walked to the living room and turned on the large television. It was CNN. The headline read, "The Fall of the House of Withers." The footage was aerial, shot from a news helicopter hovering over the Upper East Side of Manhattan. It showed the rooftop terrace of my parents' penthouse, the apartment they had bought with money they didn't have, to impress people they didn't like. "Robert and Linda Withers surrendered to federal authorities this morning," the voiceover said. The camera cut to the street level. A crowd of paparazzi and angry investors had gathered behind the police barricades. The doors of the building opened. First came Robert. He was not wearing his Italian suit. He was wearing a gray tracksuit, and his hands were cuffed behind his back. He looked old. He looked broken. He kept his head down, refusing to look at the cameras that were flashing like lightning. Then came Linda. She was struggling. She was yelling something at the officers. Her face twisted in a mask of indignation. But nobody was listening. She was handcuffed, too. An officer guided her firmly into the back of a waiting SUV. As the car door slammed shut, cutting off her screams, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't joy. It wasn't happiness. It was the feeling of a heavy weight finally being lifted. It was the feeling of a clock's pendulum finding its rhythm after years of being out of sync. "They are facing 20 years, Harrison said softly from the doorway. "Bank fraud, wire fraud, perjury, elder abuse. The district attorney is not offering a plea deal. They are going to make an example of them." "Good," I said. I watched the black SUV drive away. Disappearing into the traffic of New York City, they were gone. They could never hurt me again. They could never hurt Grandma's memory again. I turned off the television. The screen went black, reflecting the room behind me. I looked at the reflection. I saw a young woman with messy hair and tired eyes, standing in a house that was too big for her, but I also saw something else. I saw a survivor. "Thank you, Harrison," I said, "for everything." "Your grandmother did the heavy lifting," he said, raising his glass. "To Eleanor." "To Eleanor," I whispered, taking a sip. The bubbles tasted like stars. I walked Harrison to the door. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking over the Puget Sound, letting shafts of golden sunlight pierce through the gray. "What will you do now?" Harrison asked as he opened his car door. "You have $6 million. You can go anywhere. Paris, Tokyo. You can buy your own island." I looked back at the house. I looked at the ivy climbing the stone walls. I looked at the library window where Grandma used to sit. "I have some repairs to make," I said. "This house has been neglected for a long time, and there is a clock in the hall that needs a new suspension spring." Harrison smiled. "You really are her granddaughter." "I am," I said. He drove away, leaving me alone in the driveway. I walked back inside. The silence of the house was different now. It wasn't empty. It was peaceful. I went to the main hall. The grandfather clock stood there, tall and majestic. It was ticking. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It was still keeping perfect time, counting down the seconds of my new life. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the key to the winding mechanism. I opened the glass face. "Okay, old friend, I said softly to the brass gears. "Let us get you cleaned up. We have a lot of time now." I began to work, for the first time in 6 months. My hands were steady. The nightmare was over. The gears were turning, and as I looked into the complex, beautiful heart of the machine, I could almost hear Grandma whispering in the silence between the ticks. "Well done, Tina, well done. It has been exactly 30 days since the gavel fell in the district court. 30 days since the chaotic symphony of flashing cameras and shouting reporters faded into the background. 30 days since the formidable empire of Robert and Linda Withers collapsed into a pile of federal indictments and bankruptcy filings. I stood in the center of the library at Vance Manor. For years, this room had been a place of intimidation for me. It was where my grandmother conducted business with an iron will, and where my parents had plotted their schemes in hushed, angry whispers. But today, the room felt different. It felt lighter. The oppressive smell of old law books and stagnant air was gone, replaced by something fresh. I walked over to the large bay window that overlooked the gray, churning waters of the Puget Sound. The latch was stiff, rusted from years of disuse. Grandma had always kept the windows closed to protect the books from the damp air, but the books were mine now, and I decided they could withstand a little moisture in exchange for some life. I gripped the brass handle and pushed. With a loud groan of protesting wood and a shower of dried paint flecks, the window swung open. The wind hit me instantly. It was cold. Carrying the sharp, briny scent of the ocean and the wet pines of the Pacific Northwest, it rushed into the room, swirling around the heavy velvet curtains and blowing the dust off the mahogany desk. I closed my eyes and breathed it in. It smelled like freedom. It smelled like a clean slate. I turned back to the room. The boxes of legal files were gone. Harrison Thorne had taken them away to be archived or shredded. The threatening letters from my parents were gone. The silence in the house was no longer heavy or expectant. It was just silence. People often ask me how it feels to win. They assume I must be popping champagne every night, laughing at the thought of my parents sitting in a detention center awaiting sentencing. They assume revenge tastes sweet, like sugar, but standing there in the quiet house, I realize that revenge does not have a taste. It is simply the absence of a bad taste. I did not feel gleeful. I did not feel a sadistic thrill knowing that Robert was likely trading his cigarettes for protection, or that Linda was wearing a jumpsuit that clashed with her complexion. I just felt relief, the kind of bone-deep relief you feel when a fever finally breaks, or when a noise that has been humming in the background of your life for 20 years suddenly stops. I was not happy because they were suffering. I was happy because I was finally truly alone. I walked out of the library and into the main hall. The floorboards creaked familiarly under my feet. I stopped in front of my grandfather's clock, the old Guardian. It stood tall and majestic against the wainscoting, its brass pendulum swinging with that hypnotic, steady rhythm that had been the soundtrack of my entire childhood. Tick-tock, tick-tock. For the last 6 months, this clock had been a weapon. It had been a vault containing the secrets that destroyed a family. But now, looking at its intricate face, I saw it for what it truly was. It was a machine, a beautiful, complex machine designed to do one thing: tell the truth about the passage of time. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the winding key. It was a heavy piece of brass, worn smooth by Grandma's fingers over decades. I opened the glass door of the clock face. I inserted the key into the winding arbor. Click, click, click. The sound of the ratchet engaging was satisfyingly mechanical. I was storing energy in the springs, giving the clock life for another week. I wound the striking train, then the going train. I watched the weights rise inside the case. "You did good," I whispered to the clock. "You held the line." I closed the glass door. As I turned away, the sunlight from the open library window hit the base of the clock, the exact spot where the secret drawer was hidden. The angle of the light revealed something I had missed before. There was a tiny misalignment in the wood grain, an imperceptible bump in the carpentry. I frowned. I had emptied the drawer. I had taken the ledger and the hard drive. but something about the way the light hit the wood made me pause. I knelt down. I pressed the hidden release mechanism. The drawer popped open with a soft thud. It was empty, just as I had left it. But then I ran my fingers along the roof of the drawer's interior. My fingertips brushed against paper. There was a false top. My heart quickened. Grandma Eleanor was not just thorough, she was exhaustive. She knew I would find the drive. She knew I would find the ledger, but she had saved one last thing for the moment after the war was won. I carefully peeled back the tape holding the envelope to the underside of the wood. It was a small, cream-colored envelope, sealed with red wax. On the front, in her elegant, shaky script, was written, "For Tina, to be read when the dust settles." I sat on the floor of the hallway, my back against the wall, and broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of stationery. "My dearest Tina, if you are reading this, it means you have weathered the storm. It means you stood your ground against Robert and Linda, and you claimed your inheritance. I am so terribly proud of you. I know how hard it was. I know how much it hurts to see your parents for who they really are. I am writing this because I know you, my darling. I know that right now, you are probably feeling a mixture of victory and emptiness. You are wondering if it was worth it. You are wondering if you are just like them because you fought back. You are not like them. They fought for greed. You fought for the truth. But I have one final instruction for you, and this is the most important one. Do not let this battle define you. Do not let your life become about their failure. The best revenge against people like Robert and Linda is not to punish them. The world will do that for you. The best revenge is to live a life so full of happiness, kindness, and purpose that their memory fades into a shadow. Use the money. Tina, do not hoard it like I did. I hoarded it because I was afraid they would take it. You have nothing to fear now. Use the $6.8 million to fix things. Fix the house, fix the garden, fix the things in the world that are broken, just like you fix your clocks. Make something beautiful out of the wreckage. I love you, my little clockmaker. Now, stop reading this letter and go start your life. Love, Grandma. I lowered the letter. A single tear rolled down my cheek. But it wasn't a tear of grief. It was a tear of gratitude. Even in death, she was still parenting me. She was still guiding me away from the cliff edge of bitterness. I folded the letter and put it in my pocket. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. I picked up my phone. I dialed a number I had memorized years ago. Ethelgard Horology. This is the director's office. A familiar voice answered. Hello, Mr. Henderson, I said. There was a pause on the line. Tina, is that you? His voice was frantic, eager. Tina, I have been trying to reach you for weeks. We saw the news. We saw everything. The board is mortified. We want to offer you your job back, with a raise, a significant raise, and a formal apology. I smiled. I looked around the kitchen, at the peeling paint on the cabinets that I now had the time and money to restore. Thank you, Mr. Henderson, I said gently. I appreciate the offer, truly, but I'm not coming back. But why? He stammered. You are the best restorer we have. We can match any offer. It is not about the money, I said. I have a new project. I am opening my own workshop. Oh, he said, deflated. I see. Well, what will you call it? I looked out the window at the garden, where the weeds were overgrown but the roses were still blooming, stubborn and red against the gray sky. Eleanor's time, I said. I hung up the phone. The next few hours were a blur of activity. I didn't sit around contemplating. I worked. I called a contractor to schedule the roof repairs. I called a landscaper to clear the overgrown brambles in the driveway. I transferred the funds from the trust to a new account, earmarking a portion for a scholarship fund for students studying mechanical engineering. By late afternoon, the house was buzzing with a different kind of energy. It was the energy of renewal. I went back to the library. I cleared off the heavy mahogany desk. I moved the legal papers, the tissue boxes, and the remnants of the trial. I laid down a soft, velvet matte. I set up my magnifying lamp. I lined up my tweezers, my screwdrivers, my oilers. I went to the safe and pulled out a project I had been too depressed to touch for 6 months. It was a small, intricate carriage clock from the 18th century. It had been crushed in shipping. Its mainspring snapped, its balance staff broken. Most people would have thrown it away. I sat down in the chair, Grandma's chair, and adjusted the height. I put on my loupe. The world narrowed down to a circle of magnified light. I saw the broken gears. I saw the dried oil. I saw the damage. But for the first time, I didn't see it as hopeless. I saw it as a puzzle waiting to be solved. I picked up a screwdriver. My hand was steady. My breathing was slow. Outside, the clouds finally broke apart completely. A shaft of golden late afternoon sunlight pierced through the open window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. They looked like gold dust. The light washed over the desk, over my hands, and over the broken clock. I took a deep breath. My parents were gone. The lawsuit was over. The money was safe. But none of that mattered as much as this moment. The moment where I put the tool to the screw and applied pressure. I felt the screw turn. I smiled. Time doesn't heal wounds, but truth does. And now my clock has finally started running. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey through betrayal, heartbreak, and finally, justice. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Please leave a comment down below with your city or country, so we can see how far Tina's story has traveled. And if you enjoyed seeing the greedy get what they deserve, please make sure to subscribe to the Family Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story get recommended to more people who need a little justice in their lives. See you in the next video.